So first, we did just want to go over what Empowered Food New is. So we are an arts-based collective of young first and second generation Vietnamese Canadian diasporic women. We were established in 2018, and we have some of the founders here, including Julia, Wave Julia, established in 2018. The Empowered Food New, also known as EPN Collective, dreams of creating a space where Vietnamese women and non-binary folk can share their stories and reclaim their intersectional cultural identities through the arts.
Okay, awesome. So we just want to tell you a little bit about Community Conversations. So it is a four-part virtual speaker series featuring thoughtful panel discussions with culinary professionals, scholars, and local leaders and artists like Lenora. So we'll be digging into food's connection with culture, identity, memories, and community. Aside from this one, we also have Lisa Lay, a YouTuber and culinary professional, also known as the Viet Vegan. You might have seen her on TikTok. Our April 1st speaker is to be announced soon. And then on April 15th, we have Andrea Nguyen, who is a culinary professional and published author. She will be releasing a book shortly after that speaker series. So we're excited for that. And awesome. Okay, and we're going to get started. So introducing Lenora now. We're going to have her share her screen and get started.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Lenora Quinn, and a little about me. I'm a second generation Vietnamese who was born and raised in Kitchener-Waterloo, and I went to the University of Waterloo and pursued a Bachelor of Fine Arts and Visual Culture. And thereafter, I moved to Toronto. So I currently reside in Toronto. I'm actually in my Kitchener room right now, but currently reside in Toronto while pursuing my master's in information with a concentration in archives and records management with a specialization in food studies. So in terms of being an artist, I'm mainly a multidisciplinary artist, one that focuses on conceptualism surrounding food and also Vietnamese culture and identity. Oh. So during my undergrad, when I did a visual culture thesis at the University of Waterloo, I worked with a professor by the name of Joan Couteau. And this whole thesis was a exhibition simulation and research that focused on artists within the diaspora of East and Southeast Asians within North America. And the thesis mainly focused on how these artists use food as a means to talk about nostalgia, community, and politics. So on this slide, I have pictures of She Kasai's work, and I've always been inspired by her work. The pieces that I've shown are called Survival Japanese Cooking, which was created in 2008. Kasai was pretty much a Japanese immigrant who resided in Montreal at the time of this piece, and she was really interested in the food culture there. Now, these pieces specifically questioned what authentic Canadian food was, and she created an entire cookbook that had surveys where she asked various Canadians what their favorite food was, and she also asked them to describe in their perspective what authentic Canadian food is to them. And she thereafter showcased these images of fusion cuisine, fusion Canadian cuisine, such as lettuce wraps with hot dogs, rice in samosas, and even some French fries wrapped in Vietnamese rice paper. Now, I also wanted to mention that this thesis of mine has previously been a part of the University of Waterloo's VCult 101 module in 2020. And it has also been included once more this year. And it will be a part of the University of Waterloo's Fine Art Department's Center for Extended Learning course in later 2023 and 2024. And that's in the works right now. So in case you want to take a course that involves food and diaspora, then be on the lookout for this release. So language is probably my greatest inspiration and methodology for how I create my works. I usually stick with words that I find fascinating in the Vietnamese language, words that have many homophones, various meanings, and words that are not originally in the Vietnamese language, but introduced later on by colonialism. These are all things that I try to consider when formulating poetry and then the visuals that go with them. So currently, I'm trying to work on a small ongoing project for myself called Ăn chưa or Ăn chưa, which could translate to have you eaten yet or lunch. Now, this work focuses on the translation of food names such as cơm and gạo, which are both different. They both mean rice. I mean, in English, we say rice for both uncooked and cooked rice, but in Vietnamese, there's a clear differentiation. Now, since the Vietnamese language was impacted by both French and Old Chinese, I really wanted to look into the etymologies of everything and share it with you all. Now, I also plan to expand this project in the future to focus more on foods all over the world. So a little sneak peek that I am looking at right now would be the myth of the croissant and how it was not originally French. It was created by Austrians, and a lot of people assume and think that it was made to mock and consume the Islamic crescent. Now, I also wanted to mention that this project is occasionally updated on my Instagram. I haven't really been on my Instagrams lately because of grad school and work, but I'm really hoping to get on that soon. Now, another inspiration of mine would be the Princeton research by behavioral psychology professor Thomas Talheim, who proposed that the differences between Eastern collectivism and Western individualism stemmed from the differences within rice farming and wheat farming. Now, this idea came about to Talheim when he lived in China for a while, where he noticed that there was wheat farming up in the north of China, and then rice farming was prevalent in the southern part of China. He mentioned in his paper that rice paddy farming relies on interdependence between various farmers in order for the crops to survive and even thrive. Whereas in prairie wheat farming, it doesn't really need as much coordination between various farmers. After reading about this research, I was inspired to create visual poetry. I mainly created a series called Rice Plants Don't Belong in a Land of Prairies after this. And the series is all about my displacement as a Southeast Asian who lived in the West, particularly Canada. So it's a 3-minute long video that is meant to be looped in exhibition installations. So if you haven't seen it yet, I will play it right now. And I also wanted to mention how this piece was nominated by my intensive studio practicum instructors for the National Juried BMO First Art Exhibition for 2019. I didn't win the award, but I'm very proud of myself and thankful that they felt as though this work was good enough to represent Ontario and specifically the University of Waterloo. So.
Before the rice plant becomes the rice we eat, has natural and brown skin, we might as well consider ourselves germophobic. The skin it was born with is split to purity. We believe it is more delicious, but is it any more nutritious? Yet I have been told many times that it does not matter. Consuming brown rice is a sign. Poverty is not prosperity. The color white is this entity, and that will never be the epitome of me. Banh mi is the epitome of me. A panda me is not a banh mi. Neither a banh mi is a panda me. Simply a result of pain from the fall of Saigon. It gives a part of me and takes the rest of me. The one thing I know for sure is that there's both rice and wheat. I don't know how to be me a lot of the time. You see? Please don't cry over spilled rice. Have you eaten yet? I cannot seem to show how much I love you. Does this rice even belong here? I don't want to eat something that hurts my self-esteem. Spills. It's getting more difficult to contain myself. This food doesn't taste good anymore. What you call comfort, I do not recall having. In a land full of prairies.
Hello Lam, con đi đâu vậy? Con ăn cơm chưa? Nhớ ăn cơm nha. Mẹ mong con đó, thương con nhiều lắm nha.
Okay. So, as you could see in Before the Rice Plant Becomes, that piece specifically references colorism. I found it really fascinating how brown or unpolished rice has always been a lot more natural than white rice. But I questioned why we put in all this effort to polish it into white rice. And I found it interesting how it became so predominant in our cuisines, apart from the fact that white rice has a more extended shelf life. Now, one reason for the reason like why brown rice is not as popular is because it was deemed as dirty or food that was only for pigs, food that was only for the poor. So the wealth did not want to associate themselves with that. Similarly, brown skin meant that you were also dirty or poor, since that also meant you didn't have the privilege to stay inside all day. And that this pretty much symbolized that you weren't a farmer. And so this is a really prevalent issue within Southeast Asia. And there were times when I went to Vietnam or had aunties or uncles ask me why I was so tan at times, especially during the summer. And it's like, it's the summer. Of course I'm going to tan. The sun is out and I have melanin. Like, so that's what this piece was all about. And now I also wanted to talk about our identity and how there's always a possibility as Asians who are brought up in the West that we are always going to be the ones who may accidentally self-exoticize or box ourselves into our traumas or stereotypes. And I noticed this quite a bit in boba activist type of art. And I wanted to mention how it's very important to avoid cliches when talking about ourselves. I personally try my best to speak about my own experiences rather than create generalizations or creating art that's mainly about my parents' experiences as refugees, because the truth is, while I know they have trauma through being refugees, through being boat people, through experiencing the Vietnam War, I don't fully understand how they feel about that trauma, and I don't really know what it feels like. I only know how they pass it down to me. So I wanted to mention that while the Vietnam War is a huge topic and a part of many of our histories and identities, we are not obligated to talk about it. And we can always create art about food and not relate it to the war. We can always talk about ourselves without having to mention our traumas as well, because I think it's really important to drill down the fact that we are very multifaceted. Now, with that being said, we definitely do have a lot of Indochina influences within our own cuisine and our identities, whether we realize it or not. And for example, our banh mi is certainly a symbol of the death of colonialism in Vietnam. There has been a debate on how the banh mi bread itself was traditionally created from both rice and wheat. And this is due to the fact that the French introduced wheat flour to the Vietnamese, but the Vietnamese still incorporated rice flour, as they always had a lack of access to French ingredients because there was a hierarchy at the time in Vietnam, right? And so overall, this adaptation of food reminds me of how resilient and strong our Vietnamese community is. And now, what is food art without the food? I created 2 installation pieces that were exhibited in 2020 and 2022. One was called How to Roll Your Mother Tongue, and the other was To Perfectly Wrap Your Rolls. Both speak about migration and displacement in various different ways. So the first one focused on language and how it's like a tongue twister, and it's very difficult to communicate fluently in both Vietnamese and English at times. The second piece speaks more about feminism and the body, feeling the need to conceal your sense of self. And I find rice paper to be an absolutely beautiful medium of art, since you can mold it into various forms to abstractly talk about your own experiences. And now for my Southeast Asian art account. That was created in 2019, shortly after I graduated from my fine arts degree. And I realized I didn't know anything about art created by my own community. And that's because I never had the opportunity to learn about it. And I was really frustrated over how Western our art education was. I became more interested in learning about the artists abroad and wanted to share these pieces with all of you. And it's really interesting to see how our art imitates reality and vice versa. So as you could see in the pictures here, the Three Ladies brand that's on our packaging for rice and rice papers depicts our art to portray the Vietnamese relations with Laos and Cambodia during the Indochina colonization. So, lastly, my inspiration for my art as a whole comes from my need to heal intergenerational trauma and to honor both of my parents, namely my mom. And both of them cook quite a lot and are always trying to convince me to learn more about Vietnamese cuisine in order for me to nourish myself in case we ever become far apart from one another. And that is all.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lenora. Okay, awesome. We're gonna open up the floor for anyone to ask any questions. So it's time for Q&A. You can either unmute yourself and ask directly, or you can type it in the chat. So feel free to ask some questions. We also have some questions submitted through Instagram, so we're gonna drop them in the chat. But again, feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask Lenora a question.
Everybody's shy right now. We're going to kick off with the first one from Instagram. And it would be, Lenora, what do you think is the role that art plays for underrepresented communities?
That's a really good question. So I think for underrepresented communities, oftentimes of course, they need to be having their voice heard. And art is a form of self-expression, and it gives us various ways to really understand more about each other within our community. It really also shows how we are not a monolith. It shows how we all may come from the same community, but have different experiences and different positionalities in terms of our traumas and in terms of what it's like to be living in a different country compared to our parents.
Definitely think that, yeah, art is such a powerful medium, especially for underrepresented communities. So we're so grateful to be able to share your artwork and hear more about your perspectives on it. The second question from Instagram was, what projects are you currently working on, aside from the ones that you mentioned?
So I actually am working on an installation project that is about Buddhism and food, actually, because my parents are very Buddhist. They actually cook for the temple in Mississauga. And because of this religious aspect in my life, it's very much ingrained in like how I want to express my experiences. My mom, oftentimes, she talks about ancestral worship and how that's important and it's very important to honor the people that we come from. And she's often told me that if she were ever to pass, she would be okay with me just leaving pizza at the altar if I was too busy to cook Vietnamese food or if I didn't know how. And I thought that was really sad. That it was almost as if she didn't really think that I would be capable of passing down that tradition of learning Vietnamese food and sharing it with her even after death. And I don't think she was just saying that to like insult me. I just think she was trying to be considerate, you know? And that piece is going to be all about the displacement of our identity even after losing one's parent. It's something that just lingers, you know. That piece is also going to be about lost traditions, how a lot of people are going to be disconnected from their own religions and all of that. So the installation is going to also have some more digital aspects to it, mainly because I find it really fascinating how people are becoming a lot more disconnected with our food, with our world, with our earth. Everyone's really obsessed with like technology now. And I've seen some like weird videos online of how people are doing Buddhist chants through apps and stuff like that. And now that we have like digital screens to like showcase, or not showcase, but like to pretty much just like swipe through images of people. There's just something so disconnected. So that's what I'm working on right now.
That sounds awesome. And a lot of emotions in that, your connection to your family and your ancestral background. Really excited to see how that turns out. So yeah, keep us updated on your Instagram and things like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. And the next question is, what are some wins or losses have you experienced throughout your time pursuing or exploring your art?
Oh, that's a really good question. Some wins, I would say there are spaces that do want to exhibit my art, and a lot of people find it valuable. Other wins would be like meeting more people who want to create the same type of art and talk about the same type of issues that are prevalent within our community. In terms of losses, there have been times where I would apply to various art galleries or museums. And there was this one particular time that really stuck with me. I had a whole interview, a very long conversation with one of the directors of an art gallery. And at this time, I resided in Kitchener-Waterloo. She told me that while the work I was doing was important, she didn't think there was space for it at their gallery because their gallery's audience is very white and they don't think it would really have much reception. They also told me that I would probably need to consider moving to a metropolitan area or working at a metropolitan area because that's where my work would be more accepted and I would probably have more opportunities there. And she also mentioned how it's just at that time that gallery was not ready to change. Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know that could be very, vulnerable and hard for you as an artist and especially dedicating so much of your energy and time into your work. And there's so much out of our control beyond our work. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay, awesome.
We have a follow-up question that is similar, like you kind of answered it, but maybe you can elaborate. It says, in a country that continues to marginalize East Asian culture, have you ever felt external pressures to assimilate or create art that isn't culturally significant or related to who you are or your topic of art?
For sure. But I think the complicating, like something that's very complicated is that um I feel like my art is always going to be tied to the fact that I'm Vietnamese. I don't think I could ever avoid that, mainly because of how I look. So I actually have like a story about my one friend. During our undergraduate exhibition, she only created abstract pieces, abstract painting pieces for the gallery. And every single time someone saw that she was the artist, she's Asian. Every time someone saw that she was the artist, they were really confused. And they would say things like, "Oh, you don't look like you would be the artist for this piece." But what does that even mean? Like, Asian people can't make art about like abstract things? Are they not capable of creating artworks that, look similar to Jackson Pollock's? Right? Do they have to create work about their diaspora all the time? So that was just really interesting to see and hear from my own like peers.
Yeah, that's definitely very difficult to see it from, another perspective, especially of like a friend or a colleague, for sure. Um, and I kind of want to follow up with that question, but do you feel do you ever feel confliction about making work related to your culture, in terms of like, for example, that situation? Do you ever feel like there's like a certain rebellion you want to have against artists always talking about the diaspora, or do you want to embrace it? Like, how do you feel about that?
I've come to a point where I really want to embrace talking about the diaspora on my part, but I want to explore different ways of doing it. I want to explore ways in doing it that's a lot more subtle, a lot more subversive, um, in ways that make people think farther than the usual, like creating dumplings as a piece and letting people know that it's just nostalgic. Like I want to push it farther than that.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And we're really happy to have you as our speaker for community conversations, because our upcoming anthology is all about, essentially what you create: food, culture, identity. And, this is such a great example of what we can aspire to for our upcoming project. Awesome. We would love to ask the audience a question, just to, get people perspectives in. Can you share a memorable experience you've had in connection to food, identity, and culture, and what comes up for you? Feel free to, again, like unmute yourself or drop in the chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
As we give people like a minute to think about it, we have another question came in that asks, do you find that your identity as a woman impacts your art?
Oh, for sure, definitely. um, I mean, within visual culture and within fine arts, we can see a lot of the male gaze. I don't really create art in like any art in relation to that. I don't create art about other women, and um I just think it's important to showcase my own positionality as a woman of color and my vulnerability and my traumas and my pain through those experiences. And especially since so many women of color are underrepresented, even more so than men of color in the art world, I just think it's really important to focus on that.
Along
Amazing.
to
Oh,
yeah.
I was just saying, I agree.
To elaborate on that, being a woman and a Vietnamese Canadian woman, have you faced like marginalization in your own community? Because I know some of us pursuing art ourselves, our parents don't necessarily support it right away, or the people around us or communities around us don't. So a follow-up question someone asked is, because you're a Canadian born Vietnamese woman, do you experience any conflict within your journey?
Yeah, that's really funny because well, okay, my parents at first they were kind of conflicted about me pursuing art. They knew I was good at it, but they didn't know if that would give me a stable career. And it's, to be honest, it's not like they um became refugees and settled in Canada just for their child to become an artist, you know? That's not really the plan. So I think, especially considering how our economy is, they weren't really sure about that path, especially when I was in Kitchener Waterloo. It was really hard for me to even pursue this path because objectively, the city is a lot more white. Even our art spaces, places that I've worked at here, they're a lot more catered towards, um, white people, even when they're trying to diversify their programming. It just, it's not really appealing to the locals here. So after I moved to Toronto, I've gotten way more opportunities and whatnot. And I also need to mention that I was accepted to pursuing art history at U of T, but I didn't accept that mainly because of stability too. So instead, I ended up in archives and records management. And I think the great thing about archives is that that is still kind of artistic in a way, in my opinion. The archives can really be an inspiration for your art, and it can help you learn more about your own history and your own people. And um, that's kind of how I navigated it. And it kind of helped my parents feel better about it too, because they can see that I'm actively doing other things aside from just like, painting on a canvas. They're seeing that I'm creating um, collections of photographs that are in relation to their experiences. It just makes it a lot more meaningful.
That's so great to hear that they can find their connection to it and support you in the ways that you want to pursue your career. That's awesome. Thank you. Does anyone want to share their answer to the question of can you share a memorable experience you had in connection to food identity and culture?
I'll start to get the ball rolling and hopefully that will help people generate some ideas. I don't know if it's like really memorable, but like when people ask you what your comfort food is, and I think depending on what your definition is, like if it's something that's like easy to go to, but one thing that I think of is bunzel because I remember, and it's really vivid, where I'm in my kitchen and my dad is cooking it, and usually you won't get one, you'll get like a million at you at once, right? And it's just a really homey feeling to have that dish. It's a very special dish, right? And then when you share that experience with someone else and you tell them, oh yeah, bunzel, it's crazy because everyone has that same experience. They're like, yeah, you don't cook just one, they have like 50 thrown at you. And it's I guess the feelings that you get in terms of bonding with someone and home and familiarity, I think there are a lot of emotions that come up. So yeah, that's sort of one that I was thinking of.
Yes,
I can
I'm all on
follow
the
up with
bun
that.
sale train.
I've had a similar experience, maybe a little bit less joyous and maybe more bittersweet, but it connects with what Lenora was saying about continuing our culture or kind of forgetting it. So me and my cousins always have a yearly cottage, but we're coming to that age where we have to actually think about the future. And so we had a conversation about who's going to pick up what meal when our parents aren't here anymore. And it's a little bit sad, but it's something that we do have to think about because none of us can actually do any of them now. So if you were to ask any of us to make banseo from scratch, it's a YouTube tutorial thing. So we all had to kind of choose a dish. But I think that it's really interesting that we had to do it with so much intention because if we didn't, what's going to happen? What's naturally going to happen is we're just going to forget about it. So a little bit sadder, but I think that's something that a few of us can relate to.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot about that a lot too, especially as someone who was born and raised in Canada. We definitely start to feel more disconnected from our cultural and our cultural foods. And to be fair, I've asked my parents, how do you make things? And they're like, I don't know, you just throw this thing in here. No recipe, no measurements. There's like a saying that like you stop pouring when the ancestors tell you to. Anyone else would like to share? If not, we have one last closing question for you, Lenora. But feel free to drop if you do something comes up in the chat, anyone. But I'll ask you, Lenora, what advice would you give to other artists that are trying to enter the creative field?
That's a good one. I think in general, networking is very important. And I don't know, like I can't not emphasize that. So a lot of artists should interact with other artists' work. Critiques are always important. So in art school, we have classes where we critique each other's art. as brutal as that sounds, it's very important in order for us to grow and constantly work on our art. After we're done with our art education, we don't really have those type of sessions. So it's kind of our own due diligence to seek out other people's opinions. Whether those people are artists or not, they will always have some sort of opinion on your work. And I think it's really important to be open to that criticism.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll be sharing this with our fellow cohorts for the anthology, and I'm sure they'll have a lot to learn from you. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughtful questions. If you submitted it here or through Instagram and whatnot, I thank you, Lenora, for sharing your knowledge and your artwork.
So we're just gonna share one last slide, and before we end, which is just a thank you. This is how you can keep in touch with Empowered Through New, and of course, on all of our posts, we also tagged Lenora, and Anna shared all of Lenora's contact information. So please check out Lenora's work. It's amazing. It's great, as you've seen through this presentation. And we're going to stop sharing now, and I believe recording as well.